On behalf of the City of Geneva, one of the sponsors, the Finger Lakes Institute, and Hobart and William Smith Colleges. We have three facilitators who are going to help us make this presentation. We have 5 speakers, and we're going to start out with Melissa Young, who's the Assistant Director of the Center for Sustainable Communities Solutions. That's part of the Center of Excellence at Syracuse University. Melissa's going to get the ball rolling, and then we'll go to our moderator, Chris Dodson, and Lisa Ruggiero, who are going to help facilitate things and make this a very interesting conference and summit. So thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you to the Geneva City Council, the Hobart and William Smith Colleges, and the Finger Lakes Institute for having us here and for working with us, or letting us work with them to be here. So I guess the first thing is, how many, by your hands, raise your hands, attended the first summit last year? Awesome, glad to have you back. For one, I understand that we had some really good presentations of the state of affairs for solid waste disposal in the counties at the last meeting. In tonight's meeting, we want to talk about what the vision for the future can look like for this region. The work that we do for the Center for Sustainable Community Solutions in other areas in New York State and in the Caribbean is helping to promote sustainable management of discarded materials. Though there are a lot of great waste reduction, recycling, energy, composting activities in this region, as you can see on the screen, the 2010 data that Ontario, Wayne, and Seneca counties' recycling rates are all under 15%, or should I say 14%. So there's still some work to do. The word waste is a concept of use and throw away. It's a human construct, and we can move beyond this way of thinking and behaving. A lot of resources and energy go into these materials that we use and toss. The question for today is, how can Ontario and Seneca counties, as well as other counties in the Finger Lakes region, look at reducing waste or making less of these materials? And how can these counties build industry around building new materials that can be reused or recycled? We have a great lineup of speakers tonight that will help us to address these questions. While they are speaking, perhaps we could all think about new ways of thinking beyond waste. So I'd like to pass it off to our moderator, Chris Dodson, for the evening.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Chris Dodson. I'm the Associate Director of the Environmental Finance Center at Syracuse University. My most crucial purpose for attending here tonight is to keep everybody on time. We have 6, maybe 7 speakers tonight, each of which has 15 minutes of time. The most important part of tonight is to have time at the end for conversation, discussion, answering and addressing some of the questions that folks in the audience have. So then between you asking questions and folks speaking is poor little old me trying to make sure that they stay to their 15 minutes. So I'll do that as much as I can. And for you, as you're watching these presentations, keep in mind the questions that you might like to ask, or the things that you want clarification on, pieces of information, statements, whatever. You should have received an index card when you signed in tonight. If you didn't, or if you think you're going to have a lot of questions, you need more than one index card, raise your hand right now. We have someone who can come around and give you an index card. So it doesn't look like anyone needs one. Oh, I see a couple of hands back there, Lisa. So write down those questions, and we will collect index cards from folks on the other side of the aisle as well, Lisa, when you get an opportunity. We'll collect those questions between speakers. If you're not ready to give up your card, you don't have to, but if you have one, pass it to the end, and between speakers, we'll come and collect those cards. what we intend to do with those questions is to aggregate them. If 10 people ask one question, then we'll prioritize that question. And at the end, we'll address some of those questions. And certainly as time permits, we will take questions directly from the audience as well. If this is your first time in this facility, knowing that you're going to be here for about 2.5 hours, you may be interested to know where the restrooms are. If you go straight out the door to your left, there's stairs going down into the basement. That would be the closest place to go to use the restrooms. Taking those stairs. What else was I going to say? I think that's it. So I want to get started with our first presenter, who is Charlie Evangelista. He's a senior member of the Ontario County Board of Supervisors, having represented the City of Geneva at the county level for the past 20 years. He currently chairs the Public Works Committee and is a member of the Environmental Committee and the Public Safety Committee. So he'll be our first presenter, and he'll have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. I have about 40 slides that I'm going to get through. So if you have any trouble seeing what's going to be up there on the screen, I strongly suggest that you move up. The second part of it is there's a lot of content that's on the slides. So in the event that I'm going too quickly, please just raise your hand and I can use the clicker to not advance as quickly as I want to. But I have been a member of the Environmental Quality Committee for several years. My talk tonight is on the Solid Waste Master Plan. Our plan has been going on for the last couple of years. Sure. Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, well, that's okay because I have some notes that are also on. Sorry. They can't see me. Actually, I sound much better than I look. You want me to go over here? Is that okay? Yeah, but then I can't really see. I do, but I really need to see that screen exactly. I really need to see right there. Everybody pretty much knows what this mug looks like. So let's get on. I only have 15 minutes, so let's really get on with the program. So it's the Solid Waste Master Plan. Each county has been charged by the state to develop their plan. We are, if our plan is approved ultimately by the state, it will be the first county plan that has a landfill. So it's significant that what we've done and what we are going to advance to the state has some really, I think, opportunities in terms of what the state wants to do and what we all want to do, which is ultimately to keep as little as possible into the landfill. So the first few slides are going to be about what the state plan is. Then I'll try to get into the county plan and the county's plans regarding the goals and implementation of those plans. And then I think what's really significant, and Mark is going to follow me, so if it's redundant, that's fine, because I think that's the most important thing that we want to emphasize tonight, is that we really have some opportunities to do some of the green initiatives that we want to do, because we may have the money to do those things. So this essentially is what the state had originally talked about, and it focused in on the end of the pipe, so to speak. And that's where the state previously was. And this is pretty much where we want to go. Okay, and here's the goals now. And I know it's a lot of them, but these are pretty much what the state wants to see every county get involved with. It's significant to note that New York is currently a net exporter of solid waste to other states, and that's mostly from New York City, Long Island, and Westchester counties. We talked a little bit over dinner about that particular thing. Why the state wants to have New York should not be a net exporter of solid waste is something that I think is up for at least a little bit more discussion. But again, this is the state's plan. It addresses poor packaging. One banana and one package. Yeah. All right, and this is pretty much where we want to go, or what the state wants us to go. All the good things in terms of composting. Change the packaging, and I put down in the notes some of the things that we're going to be able to do as a county, we're going to be able to control. But some of the things that need to be done on a larger macro level is going to have to be done at the state level, and it's got to be done with the major companies that are, they're going in that direction, but they certainly need incentives to keep that up in terms of the packaging. And that's an example of, obviously, reuse. Again, we're talking about the state and what their mantra is. All right. Now we get into the local solid waste management plan, which is ours, as far as Ontario County is concerned. So I'll let you read that. I don't want to insult you by reading the slides. But the last bullet, the state says local solid waste management plans should evaluate and then propose methods to reduce waste, increase reuse, recycling, and composting within the planning unit. Planning units will be afforded flexibility in determining how to best implement their programs. They will not be ordered to establish specific facilities or programs or to be held to firm or mandatory goals. Rather, they will be asked to work as aggressively as possible to reduce the amount of waste destined for disposal, which I think is kind of loose and is kind of open-ended, and it doesn't seem to have much teeth as far as enforcement is concerned. And that's where I think the onus is going to be back on the individual counties. Okay. As far as process, this is what we did. Again, somebody asked me how long this has been going on. I didn't even know you had a plan. This has been going on since 2011. We got behind 18 other draft local solid waste management plans. The first comments we received back from the state was on February 2013. The second comments came back on November 14, 2013. Numerous, it's just going back and forth. We finally got an approvable letter that was issued by DEC on February 24th, pretty recently. And then DEC expedited review of the Ontario County Solid Waste Master Plan because they see it as a model for other counties to use. So that's how we got to where we are at right now. Okay, what's in the plan? I think it's significant to note that a 2-year progress report is required. So once we finally get the approval by the DEC of New York State, there's 2 years in order for us to get the plan up and running and to see essentially where we're going to be at with some of the things that we want to do. And here's our to-do list. This is the task. Specifically, Chapter 16. Again, this is the book. This is the Solid Waste Master Plan. So I knew I only had 15 minutes and that wasn't going to happen for me to read it all. But that's the plan. And we focused in on the 16 specific objectives. Okay. Geez, I didn't hear any booming. But that's our landfill. And that's the current photo of the landfill. And I put that up there because that tells us that we've got about 14 years left of life with that landfill. Many of us want to use these next 14 years to plan for the end of that landfill as we know it. But how we get there is important, because some of the things that we're talking about in the solid waste master plan, we can do now and essentially set the table for the end of the landfill. And that shows you the next cell, and that essentially is, in my opinion, all the space that we have left. Mark will talk about some of the other things that are associated with that. Okay. Implementation of the task, how we do those things. And these are the different things that are within the plan. We're starting to see a lot of that now. Again, at the end, I'll really try to hammer home that many of the things that we're doing here, or that we want to do here, require money. And I think we have a way to do some of these things if we have the political will and the people will to do them. Right now you can burn, and I didn't even know that, but you can burn here. How are we doing for time? 5 minutes, okay. And these are the keys. Oh, that's SpongeBob. That was, yeah, he's, I didn't know some of the deer carcasses were a big deal, but it's included in the plan and what we do with them. Okay. And these are some of the really key things that we need to do and how we do them. These are grouped because they all involve, and one of the things, I think one of the shortcomings that we had in the plan is needing more data about waste and recycling streams. That was one of the criticism that we had in terms of gathering data. And while we tried to solicit that information, a lot of it wasn't really forthcoming. So we need to do more work on that. And we also need to adjust programs to fit. Again, this is a county-specific program. So what is happening here in the city of Geneva may not be happening or relevant in Honeywell, or what's happening in Eastview may not be relevant for Canandaigua. That's Town of Seneca. Then we got the density of Geneva, city of Geneva. Shot. That's downtown. Eastview. Okay. That's the schedule. Where are we at as far as time, folks? A couple minutes? Okay. These are the goals of the implementation. This is what we hope to do. Okay. Probably the most important slide is the last slide. As I showed you the shot of the landfill, the next cell, or the last cell, hopefully, there's some money associated with that next cell. And according to the contract, the vendor is going to pay Ontario County residents that amount of money. Don't get hung up on the different cell parts, with the total of 18 million. What I think is really dynamic and what I think is really important to know is that all counties are going to have a solid waste municipal plan. all of them are going to have pretty much the same ideas as we do in terms of diversion and in terms of keeping things out of their respective landfill, or if they don't have a landfill, just out of the waste stream. But my own individual thought is going to be, we could talk about the question and answer, is that we need to divert the money that's going to be given to Ontario County to either do some of the things countywide or do them for each municipality. Again, I showed you the shot of the differences that we have within this county. But at the same time, the needs are great. And I think it's important that this body here, and as we go forward, has the will and the interest and the conviction to leverage the money, some of that money. I know Supervisor Shepherd's here in finance. He might not want the whole 18 million, but there's a certain amount of money that we need to have to do the plan and to do it well. We could leverage it with other grants, we could leverage it with other nonprofits, and I think it's exciting to know that we have the potential to do some of the things that we need to do in the next 10, 12 years to prepare for the end of the landfill. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Charlie, for that opening presentation. I'm assuming that the solid waste management plan might be available on the county website if folks wanted to learn more, or?
I thought it was up on one of the slides.
Okay, okay. So our next presenter is actually two presenters. We have Barb Ekstrom and Kat McCarthy, both from Tompkins County Solid Waste. Barb has been with Tompkins County Solid Waste the Tompkins County Solid Waste Manager for 25 years. Under her leadership, Tompkins County has implemented programs and operations that have resulted in a waste diversion rate of 60%. 60% is quite high. I'd like to say those of us in Syracuse and Onondaga County also have a 60% diversion rate. This success, I mean, this rate has really been accomplished through public-private partnerships, alternative funding strategies, and incentives to reduce waste. Barbara received her bachelor's of science and master's of science from Cornell, and prior to becoming the county's first solid waste manager, she was employed by the U.S. Soil Conservation Service and as an environmental consultant. And then presenting with her is Kat McCarthy, who over the past years has worked to develop and implement programs to increase waste reduction, reuse, recycling, composting, and green purchasing in the community. She serves on the board of the New York State Association of Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling, or NYSAR 3 for short, or just NYSAR, I don't know. And as Region 7 representative and board secretary. She's a master composter, and she spends her free time coordinating volunteers who staff compost recycling and trash sorting stations at local events. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Barb and Kat up, and I'd also like to try to convince you to use this podium. The lighting is so much better. Charlie does sound better than he looks, but I bet you guys might also sound and look good. So if we can get you over here, then we have better light for the camera.
Okay, well, let's go. Let's give it a shot. Okay, we've been introduced, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about our mission, our goals, and really how this has all happened in Tompkins County. So basically, we try to manage our solid waste in a number of different ways, and we have lofty goals, and we'll talk about how we're going to get there. Our current waste diversion, actually, we just finished the numbers, it's 58%, but it's close enough. And that is really as it relates to recycling and composting in our planning unit. Let me give you a little history, because I have been with this program for almost 26 years. I will tell you, I have a 29-year-old daughter and a 25-year-old daughter, so that's something to kind of measure my time with the county. Of course, we had the municipal dumps that were closed, and we then went into the landfill stage. Of course, those were dumps and quarries and places that we learned later we shouldn't be dumping material. In 1988, and that was when I first started. Actually, it was 1987, 88. I remember the meetings with the Garbage Barge, MOBRO, and Legislative Commission on Solid Waste. That was Maurice Hinchy at the time. Where Will the Garbage Go was one of those reports, and new regulations were developed and guided by the DEC. So basically, here's a little bit of our history and what's really important. We were under consent order to close 2 landfills when I came. That had to happen. They were polluting the environment. And so basically, we were in a position where we had to haul our trash for what we thought was a temporary time until we sited the new landfill. So that's what we did. We were surprised to realize that the costs of trying to site our own landfill for 100,000 people, and roughly speaking at the time about 75,000 tons, kept climbing and climbing and climbing, and then all of a sudden we got these bids, and all of a sudden I scratched my head because they were quite a bit lower. And I said, where do we want to put our money? I worked with some legislators, and the decision was made not to build an in-county landfill. And at the time, of course, the landfills that we were shipping to were not in New York State, they were in other states. And so we began the quest to reduce our waste as much as possible so that we wouldn't impart any more headache on those landfill areas that we could, and we began to see how far we could go to reduce our solid waste. One of the things I did it was about 25 years ago. I was actually I had just had a baby, and I was looking, I was told, you need to figure out what incentives you want to use. And so, of course, I had spoken with some people out west, and met with the person who developed the pay-as-you-throw concept in Seattle. And I clearly felt that the most important incentive, and this was 25 years ago, was to develop what I called the trash tag system. And we also needed to adopt mandatory recycling. Now, I will tell you that I was a rebellious teenager, and the idea of mandatory anything wasn't the most appealing thing to me. But on the other hand, the pay-as-you-throw program seemed like, I thought to myself, if we could really implement trash tags, and every can or bag was required to pay to have a tag on it that showed the cost of disposal. People would only use whatever trash tags they needed to throw away their trash. All right, that was help in the right direction, and indeed that turned out to be the case. That is a law in Tompkins County for the haulers, but they, at this point in time, they think it was their idea, not mine. So basically from there, we started our first partnership with the local cooperative extension to help people understand how to reduce waste through composting. We were also in the business of siting a new facility, a recycling MRF, combined with a transfer station. The reason that I chose that was because we weren't large enough to have one of each, and that it would serve the purpose someday of being able to pull some valuable materials from the trash, as well as having a separate recycling center. That was a good decision. The other thing we did was we established at that site a household hazardous waste center to reduce the toxicity of the material. And one of the things I didn't mention here is that we also started a curbside recycling program for the entire county. That basically we worked with the private sector to collect and bring that material to our facility. That was a good idea because it was, at the time, it was about $13 per household per year, instead of it being a lot more for your own hauler to collect it. And it was much more efficient, and it really gave the impetus for people to reduce the number of trash tags that they had. Finally, recent years, we've grown quite a few of our reduce, reuse, recycle, rebuy programs. Cal will talk about that in a little bit. And we actually just started a contract in 2011 with improvements to the recycling center, which I'll discuss, That contract is a 10-year contract with Casella Recycling. And finally, we're going to take a stab at really getting to 75% diversion with very serious food scrap diversion programs for recycling, and we'll talk about that later as well. Funding. When we recognized that we had this big job to do, we realized that we weren't going to be able to pay for all of this through a disposal fee. But the county also realized that the property tax couldn't support it either. So the Division of Solid Waste became an enterprise fund. And basically, the disposal fee, which residents pay through their trash tags or commercials pay through a per ton fee, was one aspect, which really represents about half of my total $6.3 million budget right now. The other was an annual solid waste fee. We did get state enabling legislation, so that fee is available to other municipalities, and that pays for all of our non-disposal costs, including the capital investments and all of our programs. Just so you know, there's a fee structure for that, which different people pay, including the tax-exempt colleges. Other funds, we were very aggressive in going after significant grant money, primarily at the state level, but also at the federal level, and that has been a major impetus as well to keeping our costs down. And of course, recycling revenues, working together with a national recycling company all these years, and we've had 3 now. Again, the market, we get a very, very high revenue from the sale because of the millions of tons that they actually sell. All right, this is a really old slide. We haven't updated it, but it still applies, which is kind of cool. So the way this works is you've got a hauler who sells these trash tags. They're all different colors for the different haulers. We have some specs on those. The residents put their tags on cans and bags. Hauler picks them up and then in turn pays a disposal fee. This even applies if the hauler isn't coming to our recycling and solid waste center. There are haulers that, there's another hauler that has their own transfer station, and these other haulers who go directly to the landfills near you. So, but it still applies, and we do have an enforcement officer who does about 6 different things, and one of them is to make sure people are still using these tags. So as far as the user fees, again, I describe this as a local law. This is what gives us our stable funding source for both capital improvements and funding for our programs. Very, very important. There's a number of categories in terms of how we charge, and I do pay money to our finance department. I don't get anything for free in Tompkins County because I'm an enterprise fund and they all charge me for everything. But in any event, that fee is about $1 per year, $1 per week for residents, and then there are other categories as well. Some of the programs it funds are recycling, the recycling facility, collection, and all of these other things that we talked about. We do contract with a nonprofit, Finger Lakes Reuse, for the reuse center and more stuff that Kat will talk about. Here are one of the things that's been important to me all along, and it remains important, and maybe that's why I'm still in my position, is that I believe strongly in the public-private partnership model, as well as partnerships with nonprofits. And that I would say about 85 to 90% of our budget is through these contracts of one sort or another. And we coordinate, we're very involved in quality control, quality assurance, and I've got to hurry up. I talked to you about the recycling program already. I talked to you about the recycling center. Talked to you about how that partnership works. One of the things that's novel is we do take a lot of materials, both curbside and at the facility. This is all new. That's our observation walkway over there, but there are, I just noticed a typo. Single steam. might need to correct that. Single stream recycling is the main function. Commercial recycling is, I think, one of the coolest things we do. That's a single stream that's high fiber that comes from a lot of the commercials. We actually pay them to bring their material in, universities and haulers and things like that, so that we get the high fiber, which has the most revenue, which helps us in every way. We've got a drop-off area for lots of stuff at our facility, and then we also transfer waste. What I won't do is I won't get into all the details of this because we're running out of time, and I will say that Cuba Compost and Tompkins County have a 3-year contract, and they're about to get, hopefully soon, a permit modification to take more material. And we do work with businesses, schools, events, and we're now into residential pilot collections as well as drop spots. And Kat can go from here. Thank you.
We're working with Cuba Compost on expanding options for both residents, businesses, and schools. The first one that we have for residents is drop spots. We have 2 in the county where residents can actually bring their material to compost if they don't want to do it on site. And Cuba Compost, one of the nice things is they take a little more material than what you would traditionally compost at home. So your compostable disposables, your meat, bones, and dairies, that's some more options and more opportunity to divert material through that. We have started a curbside pilot that started this past fall with about 400 homes where we actually go through and collect material. We're looking at a phase 2 expansion in the coming months to continue that as well. And we do work with multifamily homes as well, trying to, anything with 5 units or more, we're working with on the food scraps recycling through that program. In addition to composting offsite, we are working with Cornell Cooperative Extension for their compost education program. This has been a partnership that's been in place for about 20 years. And what they do is they do the Master Composter training, which is peer-to-peer education, and they also offer resources and support to individuals who want to compost on-site. We see value to both ends of the composting, making it as clean, convenient, and comfortable for residents at whatever scale they're looking to compost material. Our Re-Business Partners program is designed to help businesses, organizations, and schools practice the 4 Rs. What we do is we offer a free waste assessment where we'll actually meet with a business representative to kind of understand what some of their issues are and their challenges are. We provide them with a benchmarking report that also includes kind of the next steps. What are your opportunities? How can you seize those opportunities? And we also share some tools with them: free recycling bins, signage, decals, and ongoing technical support. The benefit there is we're helping them increase recycling, so that's helping us increase our goals as well. So it's a win-win for those businesses. Finger Lakes Reuse, Bart did mention we have a partnership with them. They're one of our many public-private partnerships. They operate a reuse center as well as an e-center, and they do have construction and demolition, deconstruction service, which is an alternative to demolition, where they're actually taking buildings apart by hand and reusing, salvaging the materials that they take apart. The 4th R in our 4R programs is rebuy. It's our green purchasing piece, and that's where we close the loop. So we have a website, Finger Lakes Buy Green, that helps share resources for that. We're also in support of extended producer responsibility programs. Earlier it was mentioned about packaging, product stewardship. That's the type of thing. So having the producers take responsibility for the materials that they're producing. In order to help engage people, we have a lot of outreach initiatives. We offer tours, we come into schools, we do summer camps, and we're also at events. We've got a team of outreach assistants that comes to events, meets people where they are, kind of mingles through the events, and shares information about our programs. And along the lines of events, we also offer a borrow bin program, so event coordinators can actually increase their recycling. They don't have to actually own recycling bins. They can borrow our bins and collect materials from the events. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Bart.
You assume I have 30 seconds to a minute. We are in the process of developing our 10-year solid waste plan to go as far as we can with diversion. We have been, a lot of what we've already done with getting to 60% is, far along, but we've got to add some other components having to do with waste prevention and organics, which is a significant part of the waste stream. There's no question in my mind that there will be drop spots all over the county, as well as the option from haulers to be able to pick up food scraps at the curb over the next couple of years. And again, we really are looking to grow different programs in reuse, and we are, not only did we pass a resolution in Tompkins County to support the state's initiatives, we're also working with the state on furthering their initiatives because they need a little bit of a kick. So we strive to work with all of our customers. That's how we look at them. And they pay fees, both in terms of throwing their garbage away and their annual fee. And again, we're very customer service based. We see over 170,000 customers per year doing one thing or another, and we try to offer as many options as people can and get the word out in terms of not just the single stream recyclables, the special materials, the food scraps, and all that and more. And we do try to promote our public, our nonprofit and private sector partners. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to interject, but I just wanted to let people in the audience know. Barb was kind enough to bring a package on the details of a number of their aspects of their program, as well as dollars and cents and what things cost. And I have all that information organized for you. If there's any supervisors or municipal officials that would like a package, please see me. I'm holding a bunch of them. I have a limited number, but I'd like to make sure that I get these to you because it'll be very useful. And we can email it later, but we have some right here for you. Thanks, Barb.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks again, Barb and Kat, for your presentation. It's nice to see communities that are really progressive in their solid waste management. And I learned something new about the 4 R's. I, until today, only thought there were 3. Rebuy. So our next presenter is Graham Fenney. Virtually all waste materials are valuable resources that should be recovered and reclaimed for the benefit of mankind. Most importantly, to secure future adequate supplies of safe, healthy food and potable water while meeting human sanitation requirements, most especially in a time of pronounced ecospheric alteration. No waste material is carelessly discarded into our environment that is not more beneficially utilized as part of an organized and sensible upcycling enterprise. To that end, Graham Fenney is the founder of Epiphergy, a New York-based organization that sustainably upcycles organic waste materials. So please join me in welcoming Graham.
Thanks and good afternoon. I'm Graham Fenney. I'm also, for those of you who don't know, a resident and taxpayer of Ontario County, so it is nice when I get to play in front of a home crowd. For the past 5-6 years, I've been actively involved in developing solutions to deal with organic waste materials. And one of the very first things that I learned was that there's a wide range of organic waste materials. And even though we can generally break them up into categories such as food scraps, manure, and otherwise, even in the world of food waste and in beverage waste, there are multiple different levels and categories of waste. It's not helpful to think about waste as one type of material, because in reality, waste is an agglomeration of multiple types of materials. One of those types of materials was at one point in time valuable to us, but when it ceased to be valuable, we discarded it. Where that waste goes today is to a landfill. And what Epiphergy does is it tries to intercept those waste materials and to recover the maximum amount of value from them to keep them out of the landfill. Why do we do that? Well, from a business perspective, it's quite simple. Those materials are still worth something, and we can make more money as a business by recovering them and by keeping them out of landfills than you can make by simply digging landfills and burying the garbage in them. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, but we've been doing the landfill thing for so long that I think it's become habit. Here what we're presenting is that food waste can be kept out of landfills by turning that food waste into higher value products, animal feed, biofuels, organic fertilizers, and so on and so forth. The reason that this works and is sustainable is because those high value products more than pay for the cost of the processing that's required to turn that food waste into something beneficial. The cost of landfilling and the cost of processing and composting food waste are more or less equivalent. It's only by taking food waste and turning it into higher value products that we're going to be successful in separating these materials and extracting the maximum value from them. I think that one of the most misunderstood things in the United States and in the waste discussion is just how much food waste there is and how much of what we put into landfills is organic. These are the EPA statistics. They come from the latest and greatest MSW report. They do one of these every couple of years. And we've broken it down to show you exactly, category by category, where waste is being generated, recycled, or landfilled. And this is all municipal solid waste. So this is the stuff that we put into our garbage cans at home. This is the stuff that goes into dumpsters behind restaurants. And this is what you'll generate in any sort of a business or campus environment. You'll notice that only about a third of MSW ends up getting recycled. That's the national average. So when you hear numbers thrown around like 50 and 60%, those are really good. So kudos to those guys who are getting there. The other striking thing when you look at a table like this is the paper and paperboard, the wood, the food waste, the yard trimmings. These are what we would normally consider to be the organic fraction of municipal solid waste. And when you add it all up, you'll see that it's about 50% of what is currently being thrown into landfills. 50%. That implies that we could extend the average lifespan of a landfill by double if we were able to get the food waste and other organic materials out of the landfill. Well, why would we want to do that? Food waste and organic materials decompose in landfills, causing methane leakage and greenhouse gas emissions. That's well established. I'm not going to use the climate change bully pulpit today. We've come up with, I think we're calling it atmospheric alteration now. But whatever the case is, we don't want methane leaking into the atmosphere, and keeping organic materials out of landfills helps us do that. The other thing is that all of that food waste was grown using valuable nutrients, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, soil amendments, etc. To harvest that material from productive farmland and bury it in a landfill precludes the possibility of recycling all of those valuable soil nutrients and growing more food. So think about it. When you throw a banana in the garbage can and send it off to a landfill, that's a banana that is not going to be grown someplace for you to eat because the nutrients have been thrown away. Food waste is by far the one category of waste that we in America do the poorest job recycling. In the recycling column, you'll note that we do about 62% for paper and paperboard. Why? Well, as noted earlier, fiber is valuable. Paper, cardboard, these are primarily where recycled paper come from. We do a great job recycling paper and paperboard. We've been at it for 75 or 100 years. Food waste, not so much, 2.5%. I think we're not trying hard enough. when I say trying hard enough, what I'm getting at is that we need to think about focusing efforts at each and every step of the food recovery hierarchy. This is a framework that's put forth by the US EPA. You'll see it a lot in circles talking about food waste, GMA, FMI. Everybody goes to the same hierarchy for managing food waste, but it's not just about food waste. We can apply this same sort of hierarchy to any sort of recycling exercise. So for example, it starts with source reduction. We want to make less waste in the first place. Moving on to using that food waste beneficially, we want to try to feed hungry people and feed animals with it before we use that material for industrial uses or compost it. And then finally, at the very bottom, the smallest bit of the pyramid, we'll consider landfilling or incineration or some other means of non-value recovery disposal. Now, in the particular case of organic waste materials and food scraps, this is how Epiphagy has worked through this process and made sure that we're checking all the right boxes. It's kind of tough to read, so I'll call it out here. Starting at the top level, in the source reduction, we work actively with customers to help them identify where they're generating waste so they'll make less of it. As much as it's nice from a business perspective to do more business, we as a business add value to our customers by helping educate them about taking advantage of waste reduction opportunities. We recognize that it's not entirely self-defeating to do this. There is always going to be an overproduction of food. It's necessary. Think about it. If you went to the grocery store and saw bare grocery shelves, what would that tell you and how would that alter your behavior and buying patterns? We want a comfortable surplus. That's what helps keep food prices low and helps make sure food's available. So we do not want a perfect world where demand and supply are equal. We want a little bit more supply than demand. At the second level, feeding hungry people. It's not enough just to compost food waste. We use food waste and the nutrients in it to produce high-value food products that can be used to feed people as well as animals. We extract biofuels and other forms of renewable energy from food waste. When you compost food waste, you have to put energy into the process of collecting the food waste, turning it over, chopping it up, doing whatever you do, but all of this takes energy. If we do this right, we can not only get back the food value that we threw away, we can get back the energy value and also the compost. We don't have to sacrifice compost in order to get biofuels and animal feed. We're just doing a better job of fractioning the materials. Not to get too far off topic, but for anybody who's interested in the science, if you think about what a biofuel like ethanol is chemically, it is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. If you had composted food waste, that same carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen would have been released, but not in a form such as ethanol, would have been released in a form such as carbon dioxide and water vapor. By using different biology to process food waste and organic wastes differently, we can achieve the same net results as composting from a soil science perspective without losing the carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen that we could have reused a second time beneficially as energy. So in conclusion, we can generate significant amount of revenue and do a lot of good with these organic materials that we are currently paying a lot to dispose. We can greatly reduce the environmental impacts of landfills, and we can create jobs in our communities, we can strengthen local agriculture, and greatly extend the landfills of our the lifespans of our landfills by taking a few simple and very cost-effective steps today to ensure that these food waste and other organic materials are upcycled rather than downcycled. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Our next speaker, I believe, is Gary Abraham. Has he arrived? Great. So as he joins us up to the front, Gary Abraham is a solo practitioner of law with an office in Allegheny, New York. He practices environmental, municipal, and land use law throughout New York State, including practice before New York State DEC, limited to public interest cases. After he graduated from law school, Abraham served as legislative counsel to Congressman John LaFalce in Buffalo and Washington, D.C., Natural Resources Law Institute Fellow on the LLM faculty of the Northwestern School of Law in Portland, Oregon, staff attorney at Southern Tier Legal Services in Olean, New York, and of counsel at the firm of Allen and Lippis in Buffalo, New York. Among his current clients are over half a dozen community groups and municipalities around the state opposing overly intrusive siting of utility-scale wind farms. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Abraham up for his 15 minutes of fame.
Thank you for inviting me. I've been practicing law for about 15 years and have concentrated on landfills until recently when I got involved in wind farms. But I still have several landfill cases. One of my clients is Finger Lakes Zero Waste Coalition, and I wanted to disclose that because Finger Lakes Zero Waste is obviously committed to achieve a policy goal of zero waste for landfilling. I was asked to speak on the local authority to regulate waste management. And I'll start with the statement of a problem that I think should be addressed. Commercially operated landfills can be expected to take the kinds of waste that generate the highest fees. This has become apparent at those landfills accepting Marcellus shale wastes. Drill cuttings are the largest component of such wastes. Drill cuttings are 4 times as dense as conventional waste. Landfill disposal fees are charged on a tonnage basis, that is by weight. However, landfills are permitted in terms of airspace. Every annual report required under a DEC landfill permit must calculate the amount of remaining permitted airspace. Since 1/4 of the airspace needed for conventional waste is taken up by drill cuttings, when the tonnage rate is the same, landfills can make 4 times as much accepting drill cuttings as they can when accepting conventional waste. Regardless of the kinds of waste they accept, commercially operated landfills can also be expected to use up their permitted airspace as quickly as possible, and then to apply for an expansion. Their commercial behavior is rather one-dimensional, maximizing profits without regard to public planning goals. These incentives have resulted in mega landfills, landfills larger than anyone has seen in human history. No one has any experience with such landfills for as long as they remain hazardous. EPA examined leachate from municipal solid waste landfills and from hazardous waste landfills and could not find any difference in the chemical makeup of the 2 leachates. Municipalities should consider landfills they own to be a valuable resource to be managed by extending their life as long as possible. Thus, municipalities have an interest in waste diversion and recycling that private landfill operators lack. Municipalities that have decided not to host a landfill at all have even stronger incentives to reduce waste that must be landfilled. I want to focus on kind of the real-life situation in Ontario County with the Ontario County landfill as an example. I don't want to litigate the Ontario County landfill here, but I think it's a useful example for some of the principles I want to talk about. According to Ontario County records, Casella has sent a letter informing the county that the landfill will not accept waste resulting from hydrofracking activities without permission from the county. However, only about 8.81% of the waste landfilled in the county's landfill originates in the county. This compares to the statewide recycling rate, which was 36% in 2008. Much of the remainder of the waste that goes to the Ontario County landfill is diverted from the Chemung County landfill, the Highland landfill in Allegheny County, and the Hakes C&D landfill in Steuben County, all three of which accept hydrofracking wastes from Pennsylvania. All three are operated by Casella, which diverts municipal solid waste and non-hydrofracking industrial wastes from these three landfills to the Ontario County landfill, which it operates, in order to maximize the space available in the other landfills for hydrofracking waste. The Ontario County landfill is thus an integral part of Casella's waste management plan. It should be noted that Casella's attorney also represents fracking companies such as Chesapeake and Fortuna. Casella's waste transfer practices can be expected to minimize the projected life of the landfill compared to the county's interest and needs, which should be to maximize the life of the landfill. The county will therefore need to analyze the effect of Casella's waste transfer practices on the projected life of the landfill. Let's turn for a minute to the authority of towns to prohibit landfills and landfill expansions. And again, I'll turn in a minute to the Ontario County landfill. Landfill developers try to convince towns that New York regulations provide stringent and more than adequate protections for local health and the environment. However, they generally fail to acknowledge that towns in New York have separate independent permitting authority alongside New York's DEC. Unless a town authorizes it under its local law, a DEC landfill permit is not enough to authorize construction and operation of a landfill. In fact, landfill permits issued by the DEC all state that nothing in the permit affects the obligation of the permittee to comply with local laws. Towns can impose their own more stringent regulations on landfills. Towns can restrict both the siting and operation of landfills. The town's authority to regulate landfills goes as far as an outright ban, including a ban on expansions. On May 8, 2000, a decision in the case Modern Landfill versus Town of Eagle noted with approval that even the landfill developer, quote, accepted that the town could regulate landfills to protect public health, safety, and welfare as an exercise of its police powers. Accordingly, in 2002, 2 years later, the Town of Eagle enacted a landfill ban modeled after the successfully litigated 1997 Town of Root law. Town of Root is near Albany. There are at least a couple of dozen towns in New York that have banned landfills or their expansion. A town's ban on landfills is not treated like a zoning law, but rather as an exercise of the authority delegated to the town by the state constitution, municipal home rule law, and the state's town law. Therefore, a town need not support a local landfill ban with copious technical or engineering documents as it might need to in support of a zoning decision. It is sufficient for the town to note among its findings supporting the local law that substantial uncertainty exists regarding environmental and health effects of solid waste management facilities, and regarding the ability of scientific experts or the DEC to determine the extent of such effects. This will establish the town's intent to exercise its authority to protect the health and safety of residents of the town, known as the police power. Municipalities implementing their police power by means of local legislation enjoy a strong presumption of validity, and a heavy burden is laid on those who challenge those enactments in court. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, when a community legislates pursuant to its police powers, quote, it is to be remembered that we are dealing with one of the most essential powers of government, one that is the least limitable. These well-settled principles have been attacked by Ontario County in a discussion of the town of Seneca's zoning authority, which the county says is preempted by the public need to expand the landfill. I will discuss later whether there is sufficient public need to support expanding the landfill, but that's not relevant to the county's preemption argument. Here, it's important to note that the county relies on, quote, the reasoning of In re County of Monroe, 1988, as a balancing of public interests favors exemption from local zoning. However, the county recently lost the same argument before Judge Falvey in a lawsuit brought by the town of Italy, which challenged the county's ability to unilaterally determine the balance of interests to support a proposal to erect a communications tower in the town. Judge Falvey ruled that the host town, quote, may test in a court of law whether the county is exempt from the town's zoning ordinance under the balance of public interest test stated by the County of Monroe decision. It is therefore clear that the county may not unilaterally determine that the balance of interests supports a proposal to expand the landfill in the town of Seneca. In its lengthy argument in favor of that determination in the final environmental impact statement for the expansion, therefore remains untested and tentative. However, as I indicated above, if the town of Seneca wants to restrict expansion of the landfill, its better course of action is to do so outside its zoning code and instead adopt an independent local land use law pursuant to its police powers. Following this course would put the applicability of the County of Monroe decision further in doubt. Let me turn now to what I would recommend the county do instead of expanding the landfill. The county should consider flow control as a planning tool for solid waste management. Flow control involves the enactment of a local municipal law, usually by a county, requiring that all waste generated within or transported to the county's jurisdiction be managed at county-owned facilities. In Ontario County, this would require all waste, whether for landfilling, recycling, product reuse, or other purposes, to be managed at the county's transfer stations or alternative waste management and electronics recycling facility or its landfill. This would end export of waste of all kinds to other counties. In the 1990s, flow control laws were attacked as a violation of the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which generally prohibits discrimination against out-of-state commerce. In the case United Haulers Association versus Oneida Herkimer Solid Waste Management Authority, the Second Circuit held that a New York County's flow control law is not impermissible discrimination under the Commerce Clause because the restrictions it imposes apply equally to in-state and out-of-state commerce and waste. Flow control laws therefore do not discriminate in violation of the Commerce Clause and are an appropriate exercise of municipal police powers. It is thus now clear that flow control is available as a tool to achieve meaningful progress toward an increased recycling and diversion rate. If the county requires all recyclables to be managed at county-owned facilities, for example, it will increase the volume of recyclables the county manages and ensure a predictable stream of materials that will allow the county to take advantage of volume pricing to enhance revenue from managing recyclables. The same can be said of compostables and other waste streams that have uses supporting diversion from landfilling and have markets. Stated differently, the county has authority to capture much more of the planning unit's waste stream than it does currently. The county should consider flow control in the context of developing its local solid waste management plan, which you heard earlier it's in the process of doing. Under DEC's landfill regulations, DEC cannot approve a municipality's proposal to site or expand a landfill, regardless of who operates the landfill, until the municipality has in place a DEC-approved local solid waste management plan. DEC's regulations specify in detail the required components of the plan. The plan must include a comprehensive recycling plan and an opportunity for the public to comment on the adequacy of that plan. The larger solid waste management plan must also identify imports and exports of waste for each municipality in each industry, including, for example, food processors in the county, as well as what each municipality does within the county to market materials recovered and diverted from landfill. DEC also requires the local solid waste management plan to include a full discussion of plans for expanding the landfill. DEC also requires, quote, a full pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-throw evaluation in the plan. DEC has advised the county that pay-as-you-throw programs have proven to be successful in a wide range of communities. DEC will not accept a proposed comprehensive recycling analysis, which is a component of the plan, as complete without finding the municipality has adequately addressed the extent to which local laws foster and encourage recycling. To comply with this requirement, the county's recycling analysis must include actions to be taken to maximize, to the extent practicable, the development and enhancement of economic markets for recyclables recovered from within the service area under local laws or ordinances adopted or to be adopted. An economic market for recyclables under the regulations exists when the costs of collection, transportation, and sale of recyclable materials is equal to or less than the, quote, full avoided costs, unquote, of alternative means of waste management. The term full avoided costs includes all costs associated with siting, permitting, construction, operation, maintenance, expansion, closure, and post-closure monitoring of a landfill. So all of the costs that are connected with having a landfill and expanding it are the touchstone against which avoided costs are measured. Additionally, a cost avoidance analysis must be included for any component of the waste stream that an applicant contends is too expensive to recycle. The county has not provided any full avoided costs analysis in its local solid waste management plan yet. DEC has advised the county that it may not rely on market analyses performed by private recyclers in the county. It has to do its own analysis. A proposal to site or expand a landfill is arguably an obstacle to achieving any meaningful recycling rate. The county believes that expanding the landfill and expanding recycling are unrelated to each other because, quote, it costs residents less to recycle than to dispose of waste in the landfill, as recycling does not involve a tipping fee. Since the incentive to county residents is to reduce the waste they generate for landfilling, the county believes it can detach planning to expand the landfill from planning for expanding landfill diversion efforts like recycling. Accordingly, the final environmental impact statement for the landfill expansion proposal lacks any discussion of the county's local solid waste management plan, except in the response to comments. However, as noted earlier, state environmental law and regulations do not treat a local solid waste management plan and a landfill expansion proposal as separate. Ontario County prepared a proposed final local solid waste management plan last month. The plan relies on landfill and all waste generated in the county that cannot be recovered or recycled, but appears to reserve any decision to expand the landfill, stating that its plan regarding the landfill is to apply for expansion permits as necessary to provide for uninterrupted landfill disposal capacity at the landfill throughout the 10-year planning period. What is necessary? The answer to that should be determined by the success of the county's diversion and recycling efforts. This point relates back to the local solid waste management plan requirements under DEC's regulations. DEC does not agree with the county that recycling and other diversion efforts can be separated from landfill planning. As discussed earlier, the county is required to have a DEC-approved local solid waste management plan as a precondition for approval of the landfill expansion. And before DEC can approve a plan, the county is required to show how it will develop markets for recycling. Adopting flow control is one of the most effective means to develop markets for recycling because it allows the county to capture the entire recyclable waste stream and thereby maximize its position in the various markets for recyclables. The county's proposed plan commits the county to increase its recycling rate, support new yard waste composting efforts, increase household waste collection, increase recycling of construction and demolition debris, increase product reuse efforts, all good things. Encouraging management of unique waste like pharmaceutical waste outside the landfill program, increase public outreach and education regarding waste management options, promote recycling of agricultural plastics wastes, and more. And last but not least, it commits itself to update the local solid waste management plan. Among the updates to the county's, update the local solid waste management law, that is. Among the updates to the county's law, flow control should be considered. The approach the county has taken avoids acknowledging that the landfill is a county resource, except as a revenue stream. Clearly, this approach will not encourage DEC approval of the local solid waste management plan that's required. The county should therefore abandon the fiction that waste reduction and diversion from landfilling have nothing to do with its landfill. It should instead consider how flow control and other diversion practices can extend the life of the landfill and enhance its benefits for county residents. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. Being a board member on the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency, I kind of feel like flow control is one of the strongest tools that we have to have such a high diversion rate there. So in any case, let's move on to our second to last speaker. With that said, I want to take this period of time to ask you if you have questions on cards to please raise them up. We have Adam and Lisa coming around to collect them. They also have additional blank cards if you filled up your space or if you're giving up a card and you think you might have a question with the next two speakers. So Adam and Lisa are coming around. If you have cards, please raise them up. In the meantime, we're typing all of those up so that we can capture them for our imminent Q&A discussion period of the evening. So, moving along, Steve Churchill is our next speaker. He's a lifelong resident of the Finger Lakes region. He presently... Oh. Sorry, I put it backwards, my bad. So our next presenter is Mark Venuti. He's a recently elected supervisor of the town of Geneva and a partner at Heaton and Venuti, a law firm with offices in Geneva and Penn Yan. He's been partner there since 1991. Mark serves on the county's Environmental Quality Committee and also on the Government Operations and Improved Methods and Insurance Committees, and on the board of the Ontario County Soil and Water Conservation District. He received his Bachelor's of Science from Cornell University, I won't tell you what year, and then his JD from Antioch School of Law. He served as a Geneva Town Justice from 1998 to 2009, and practiced law in Washington, D.C. from 1980 to 1990. I guess I kind of give it away there. His last position is Director of Litigation of the Public Interest Law Firm for the National Veterans Legal Services Program, representing service veterans. Just a few of his selected activities here in Geneva include being one of the founders of the Geneva Community Projects Incorporated, the Boys and Girls Club of Geneva, and he's also serves or has served on the boards of Geneva Red Cross, Geneva Area Chamber of Commerce, Fund for Military Justice in Washington, D.C., Geneva Youth Soccer Club, and also Ontario County Youth Court. So with all of that said, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Mark Venuti for the next speaker.
I gave him 3 lines for my intro, so I apologize for all that stuff. And I was told I had 10 minutes, so I ceded 5 to Gary. I want to start actually because both Gary and Graham talked about the great things that could be done that actually will extend the life of a landfill. But I think our goal in Ontario County is not to extend the life of our landfill. It would be great if we could diminish the life of our landfill, although I don't think that's, there is an end time coming. Oh, by the way, all that stuff about my age, I'm actually a high school classmate of Charlie's, the first speaker.
You better get back at the car.
We won't tell you what year that was. We're not that old.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Ontario County made a decision in 2003 and signed a 25-year lease with Casella Waste Systems. So we're a little less than halfway through that, and I know there's a lot of hope that this thing could be stopped, but I'm looking at 2028. The lease will be over according to the rate that stuff is coming in the landfill with the extensions that are planned will be filled, and that needs to be the end of it. I'm a little concerned that, as things go, the operator could come in a few years and say, well, let's sign another lease for some more time. But I really get the sense that the Ontario County Board, the staff, that we've had enough, that 2028, we are going to look to the end at 2028, not try to go beyond that. So the question is, what do you do between now and 2028? It seems like a long way away, but it's not. It's not that far away to do the things we need to do to be in a position so that there's not any crisis in 2028. Because what's going on now is we're landfilling a lot of stuff, and we're also receiving a lot of money from that lease. So if we don't do anything in 2028, we're going to have a lot of stuff that we have no place to put, and we're going to have no income that we're used to getting. So this is a crucial time, and I want to state kind of a bold goal. They talked about our solid waste management plan tries to get us to like 60%. Really, where we need to be in 2028 is zero waste. We need to be at zero waste in 2028, and we need to not be relying on landfill money. So these are the two tracks that have to come together in 2028 for there not to be a real big problem in Ontario County. So what we do between now and 2028 will tell the tale. Oh, I have it. Okay. There it goes. Sorry. So Charlie touched upon this a little bit in his presentation. The money that's coming in based on the landfill. So we receive about $2 million through that lease, a little extra money, about $750,000 based on what's going in, and payments that should equal, it's based also on space, but should equal almost $19 million. Now, here's the thing. In 2003, when this all started, and I know that the Board of Supervisors then didn't have a crystal ball, but they put they did pass a resolution that said, what are we going to do with this money? And what that resolution says and what it's been used for pretty much is capital projects, a little bit of tax reduction, and that's the plan even for these, that was made way back in 2003, even for this large sum that should be coming in the next several years. So our job as legislators, and I get the sense also from staff and people that I'm involved with on the Environmental Quality Committee, is that there is a will to change that intention that was done in 2003, that we have to put that money where it's going to help us to get in position in 2028 that we don't need a landfill anymore. So over the solid waste management plan has rather, in my view, modest goals to get us to 60% reuse or recycle or diversion of solid waste in 10 years. That would take us to 2023. We got to get to 2028. My push is going to be that we have to be aggressive. We have to shoot high. And if we say we're going to go to zero waste and we get to 95, that'll be good. And I think we can get there. It's being done. The city of San Francisco is close to zero waste. Ithaca and Tompkins County is in the 60s or close to 60, 58%. We're in the 20s to 30s. We can move, but it's going to take resources and it's going to take will. And I get the sense that we have both of those, and we're going to marshal them in the right direction. That's going to be the push that we're going to be involved in. The other thing that we have to worry about is that in 2028, this landfill has to be closed, and that's a big job. We've got under our lease, The Casella is supposed to take care of the closure, pay for it, and under our lease, and I believe also DEC regulations, monitor and manage this closed landfill for 30 years. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I'm very skeptical about organizations and entities like in corporations and LLCs doing something for 30 years after they're not making any money at that site. So one of the things that they have to put up, right now, they have to show that they have the ability to do that. So they're doing that with bonds and things like that. One of the things that we're going to be looking at, and I've talked to fellow supervisors and staff about this, is what does that really mean? Because if there isn't real money in the bank somewhere in 2028, then it's not real money. And that, because if you're buying a bond and you're buying a surety is saying you're going to pay us $250,000 and we're going to agree that we'll pay this if you default. All you have to do at the end is stop paying the bond payments, go out of business. So I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's a fear, and I'm looking at it, and we need to look at it as a board of supervisors and make sure that the right things are in place at that time so they can fulfill those obligations. This is actually a look at the closure costs. This is a little dated. The actual closure is a little under $9 million, and that's covering the. I don't know if you know how these things are supposed to work, but there's a liner under the landfill. At the end, they're going to put a hopefully, supposedly impermeable liner on the top of it, cover it up with lots of other stuff. They've got to deal with gas. They've got to deal with leachate. All this stuff's got to go on for 30 years is the thing, but really indefinitely. And that's the $8 million to do the closure. The other over $8 million is the estimate of monitoring this, trucking out leachate, and doing all those other things for 30 years. That number, by the way, is already a little bit dated. I'm told now it's about $20 million. They have to update this every year with the DEC. This just shows you, I don't know if you can read this, the kinds of things that have to be, that go into making this number up for the closure. Grading, erosion control, putting the protective layer on, topsoil, collection wells, drains. This is a big piece of property, and it's going to take a lot to close it. And I think Gary or somebody else said, we are in new territory here. I don't think that there's many huge landfills like this that have been closed or closed long enough to know what's really going to happen 30, 50 years from now. This shows the post-closure costs. They've got $4,000 in there for cap repair. All this stuff is pretty speculative. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Nobody, I mean, to know what's going to happen 15 years, 20 years after this thing closes, we're going to hope for the best. The theory is the top goes on, the bottom's on there, you're pumping it out for 30 years, it dries out, and is not a problem. Don't worry, I don't believe that either. This is just more about this 30 years. So it's a big job, and I think the story has been told before how you got into these things. Well, we're into it, and we can't wave a magic wand and the landfill's going to go away. So now we have to do the best we can to make sure that the operator is operating it correctly. And we're looking at the odor problems and things like that. And we've got to use these next 14 years to make sure they're in position and can close it and monitor it for those 30 years, and that we are ready to be a zero waste county by then. And I know that people look at Ontario County as a kind of the county feels very good about itself, what it's been able to do, and now we're going to lead the way on this. We're going to go and push this solid waste management plan, and I hope the Board of Supervisors will join me in taking an aggressive position and say, we'll lead the state in this too. We will go zero waste. That's not what our plan says yet, but it gets reviewed every 2 years. That's where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our last speaker for the evening, before we open it up for discussion, is Steve Churchill. I got it right this time. He is a lifelong resident of the Finger Lakes. He currently lives in Seneca Falls with his wife, Valerie. He's also a member of the Seneca County Board of Supervisors, where he serves as the chair of the Environmental Affairs Committee. And he is an ardent supporter of the protection of the Finger Lakes watershed. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Steve Churchill up for his presentation.
Good evening. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a scientist or an engineer. I'm just a regular person like most of you folks out there. And I'm honored to speak here tonight, and I'd like to thank, first of all, Ken Cameron and his crew for putting this together. Now, I hear from Tompkins County, and it's very impressive. And I must admit, in Seneca County, we're in the infancy stages. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For one thing, we have a very large landfill. And they've made it pretty easy for us to bury our garbage. In my town, we don't pay anything to bury our garbage in the landfill. So my story tonight is more about some of those hurdles related to that landfill. The landfill is a privately owned landfill. We've heard, for the most part tonight, about landfills that are owned by counties. We don't have that luxury. Seneca County really gets no revenues from the landfill. A landfill summit. Who would have thought we'd ever need to convene such an event? But here we are at the second annual landfill summit, and I'm sure there'll be many, many more. Loaded with questions and seeking solutions to an issue that continues to fester and grow like a cancer in our beautiful Finger Lakes region and our home. Issues and obstacles surrounding waste management and generation of the waste are many and complex, entangled in politics, regulation, driven by free market, and coupled with the attitude out of sight, out of mind, all powerful forces that have produced the current state. And it's what brings us all here tonight. But this hall is not filled with folks on the same side of the landfill issue. No, there is a great divide amongst us. To some, landfilling makes perfect economic sense, and when done using state-of-the-art practices, is environmentally sound. On the other side, the process appears to be complete insanity. They would argue that BP Oil used state-of-the-art practices, and Love Canal seemed like a good idea at the time. Both resulted in environmental disasters. Only time will tell which side is right. You know, as Mark brought up, those landfills are going to be here a long time after we're all gone. But one thing is certain, we are all to blame. Styrofoam blister packs, fast food, instructions in 10 languages. We generate waste at an explosive rate with no signs of change on the horizon. We just keep burying it, out of sight, out of mind. After all, we're a throwaway society, and we seem okay with that. But I, like you, have many questions and concerns. So let's talk landfills. In Seneca County, we have a whopper. It can be seen from every county surrounding it. It stands nearly 300 feet, 30 stories above the surrounding landscape. And it is not just a single pile of waste, but more a mountain range of trash. But it wasn't always that way. Just over 30 years ago, in the early 80s, it was a single mound, and it was less than half the height. The entire operation occupied an area of less than 100 acres. But change came quickly. In 1983, Seneca Meadows took ownership of the Tantella landfill. Seneca Meadows was then purchased by IESI out of Fort Worth, Texas in 2003, and in 2005, IESI was gobbled up by a Canadian company, Progressive Waste Solutions, one of the largest waste management companies in North America. While the company was growing, so was the landfill's footprint. Expansion occurred on the ground, in the air, and over the roads. In 1989, the DEC permitted a 40-foot vertical expansion and another 127-foot expansion 2 years later. In 2007, the DEC in the town of Seneca Falls permitted a 178-acre expansion. Today, the dump proper is 400 acres. The landfill campus is 2,600 acres, and it extends on both sides of Route 414. And there are nearly 1,000 additional acres owned by the operation throughout the county. During this growth spurt, volumes grew from 3,500 to 6,000 tons per day. That's 12 million pounds of municipal and industrial waste every day. Now let's ponder that number for a moment. The EPA estimates that on average, each person, each of us, produces 4.3 pounds of waste per day, which, by the way, is 1.6 pounds more than we produced in 1960. So we aren't improving the situation. So let's put it in perspective. If Seneca Meadows were to bury 12 million pounds of just people garbage each day, that would equal the garbage of 5 million people every day. That's a big number. That's a whole lot of garbage, all dumped in a watershed in one of the most beautiful regions on earth. You have to wonder how decisions like this get made. So let's talk about the dollars. After all, it's always about the money. I don't know exactly how much Seneca Meadows rakes in each year. It's a private company. But I have a sense of how much it spends to stay in the good graces of its host and surrounding communities. The town of Seneca Falls, my hometown, receives $2.8 million a year from Seneca Meadows in the form of a host benefit agreement. A host benefit agreement, you ask? Well, simply, it's a contract between a host community and a company. The community agrees to permit a company's operation, or at least not oppose it, in exchange for money. But is a host benefit agreement a blessing or a curse? I'll let you decide. Consider these points and questions. The $2.8 million Seneca Falls receives each year is 57% of the town's general fund, and it's 25% of the total budget. So you have to ask, how can a municipality be expected to wean itself off such an infusion of cash? How can a municipality maintain an objective view of its relationship with a company that is contributing such a large amount of money to the public coffers? Why aren't host benefit agreements in place with other companies? I know of no others. We know the landfills benefit. They just keep dumping. The town's benefit, however, is short-lived, for the influx of money will end, but the impact of the dump will last forever. Some argue, and Seneca Meadows reminds us often, I brought some flyers, we receive them about every other week in the town of Seneca Falls, or at least once a month, reminding us what a good neighbor they are by doling out many thousands of dollars to the community organizations. But aren't these handouts just smaller host benefit agreements? Is it truly given in good faith or a measure to get us to look the other way while our community, our county, and our Finger Lakes are filled with garbage? And where does that money come from? Well, I mean, there's tipping fees. But consider this. The Seneca County IDA gives a large sales tax exemption to the landfill. And when the IDA grants a sales tax exemption to a company, you and I, other folks in our county, have to make up that difference. Simply put, if the tax revenue doesn't come from the landfill, then it comes from other county taxpayers. These exemptions put a lot of cash in the landfill's pocket. Cash the landfill can give back to us in the form of donations. In other words, Seneca County taxpayers subsidize their donations. So you have to ask the question, why don't they just pay their fair share of taxes like the rest of us? And what about property tax? Seneca Meadows, that 2,600-acre campus, has long been assessed for $470,000. In 2011, the property was reassessed by the town of Seneca Falls to just over $11 million. Seems to me a parcel of 2,600 acres with loads of infrastructure should be assessed for more than $470,000. What do you think? And how does our good neighbor feel? And how does our good neighbor feel about that new assessment? Well, it has been tied up in court for 3 years, and all efforts to settle the matter have failed. So what about the future? Should the dump be allowed to expand? Are the watershed, environment, and our future truly safe? What are Seneca Meadows' long-range plans? Why are they so reluctant to share their big picture with us? After all, aren't they good neighbors? The reality is they aren't neighbors at all. Would you really expect or allow a neighbor to put a 500-foot pile of garbage in their backyard? Of course you wouldn't. They are a landfill, a large company, not unlike any other company, whose primary mission is to make money and satisfy the stockholders. We must not rely on them and their future plans to determine our future. We must forge our own plan for the future, a future without a working, active landfill. Is it possible to survive without the landfill? Absolutely, but we must start to construct that plan today. For their current permit expires in 2023. A private landfill must be properly assessed and pay their fair share in both property and sales taxes. On this point, there should be no compromise. This alone will go a long way in offsetting the dollars generated by a host benefit agreement. In addition, a portion of that current host benefit agreement dollars should be set aside to help ease the transition away from that dump money. And we as elected officials need to protect the Finger Lakes, the watershed, and our home. We need to say it loud and say it often, no more expansions. I, for one, heard the message loud and clear. Enough is enough. Our Finger Lakes has taken more than its fair share of Northeast garbage. No clay mine, no expansion, and no trash trains. When businesses learn that we are getting out of the garbage business in 2023, they will come. But rest assured, they will never come if we don't. In fact, I predict just the opposite. Allow the landfills to expand, and our next door neighbors will begin to leave. Now, we are doing some things in Seneca County. We've been a leader in recycling. We've been recycling for about 20 years. We've had a voluntary curbside recycling program, and it served us well. The program covers the entire county, and currently the cost to each tax-paying unit is $28 a year. But it's time to up the ante. We must partner and learn from our neighbors, such as Tompkins County, which is achieving incredible diversion rates. And diversion is just a matter, as was mentioned earlier, of will, planning, and good leadership. We need to get people in the right places to make the right decisions. We can and will survive and thrive post-landfill closures. It will be challenging and it may require some sacrifice, but the alternative is bleak and threatens our economy, the environment, and our home, and all that we have worked so hard to build. And that is simply unacceptable. Thank you.
like to thank all of our speakers this evening. It's about 8:20. That gives us a good solid 40 minutes of discussion until 9 o'clock. We have a list of questions we've compiled from the cards that we've collected, and I think that we'll start with those. But at this point, can I please ask all of our panelists to join us up front here? Some of the questions will may be applicable to maybe one of you, some to all of you. And as I read through some of these lists of questions, I'll try to make assumptions about which presenters might be the best to take the first stab, though of course you're all welcome to chime in. We need one more chair, but please, you're all welcome to, all the speakers are welcome to join us. All right, folks, if you don't mind, we're going to get started. We've got a whole slew of questions here. Realistically, we're not going to be able to get through all of them, but I do want to try to get through the ones that have been asked several times, and then I also want to allow some period of time for some verbal input from the crowd. So I think the first couple of questions really deal with local authority over the landfills and the activities there. As much as possible, if we can try to keep the answers succinct, that way we can hopefully get through a number of questions, but I understand that it's a complicated discussion. So the first question that was asked by several people, are 2023 and 2028 respectively, realistically, real stop dates for the two landfills? Can we really expect closure, or what could we potentially expect beyond those two dates? And I think maybe Mark and Charlie and Steve might be the best folks to chime in here first, and then of course anyone else is welcome.
Well, are we on here? Can you hear me now? Yeah. I think to answer that, the best way is one politically and then one on a physical answer. Politically, obviously, it would have to be the will of the board from this point going forward as we get new members that we say, in administrative and legislatively, this is the end of the landfill. We all talked about what we need to do to prepare that in terms of money and in terms of diversion, but I think the other part of it is that it's significant and it may be unique to Ontario County is that the current footprint is going to pretty much be self-limiting. From what the discussions that I've had over the years is that unless there's going to be a pretty good purchase to the south of land, that there's not any more land on the existing site. The last cell that we talked about that gives us the last 13 or 14 years is pretty much stays within the footprint of the landfill. So I guess from a physical point of view, unless there's going to be a pretty sizable purchase to the south side, then I think that would be self-limiting.
Steve, Mark, any perspective? I think you have to hit the button, maybe.
I would say in Seneca County, honestly, I don't think that Seneca Meadows has any desire to close in 2023. They moved to expand to the east side of 414. They applied for permits in the early 2000s and were denied. But it just shows that that's where they want to go. I think the fact that they want to start bringing in trash by rail also talks to the build-up of the infrastructure, and it speaks to growth. So, can we stop it? Yeah, the people of Seneca County, and primarily the people of the town of Seneca Falls. Certainly, it sounds like they have the capacity. It's really just a question of will.
I would just add that anything is possible. So it is a question of will, and I think people who live in these counties need to make their will known to their legislators so that we stick with the plan. because I think both these operators could very well come back and ask for more time, figure out a way to get more space in there. So we have to stay vigilant, that's all, and you have to keep sending the message that we've done our share.
And just the last thing is that Ontario County owns the permit. This is, the permit is not owned by the vendor. So essentially the power lies in the permit, and that's where I think that we can have the most effect.
Gary, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you offered some recommendations, and I wonder if you have any brief response to the question. You'll have to hit that little red button.
On the Seneca Meadows landfill, the host town can ban further expansions. The Ontario County landfill, if the host town has no, the rule in New York is if the host town does not regulate in a subject area, the county may. Otherwise, the county's home rule powers trump the county, or the town's home rule powers trump the county. So for the Ontario County landfill, the Ontario County could pass a local law banning expansions if the host town has no law regulating expansions.
Thanks. Anyone else on the panel like to comment?
I would just say for clarity that the town of Seneca, where the landfill is, has an agreement with the landfill operator, just like the county does. So both are tied in to this situation where we have to basically cooperate with the landfill operator until 2028.
So I think the next question I'd like to move on to is Casella and Ontario County have no financial incentive to reduce solid waste through composting or recycling. I said that as a statement, but there's really a question mark at the end. So how does the 10-year waste plan, I think we're talking about the Ontario County solid waste plan, address this conflict of interest? Casella and Ontario County have no financial incentive to reduce solid waste through composting and recycling. And I think essentially what that might mean is the more we recycle, the less revenue we generate through tip fees. So how does the 10-year solid waste plan address that conflict of interest?
Well, I think that Casella, if the county starts reducing its waste, they're going to get their waste from wherever they got to get it. So I don't think they're going to, and they operate a recycling operation up there now. I think as part of the county's work that we have to do, it's somebody in the planning office to look at recycling and reusing and reducing. And I think we need to get our economic development office going too, to bring in businesses in that can support this kind of diversion of waste. Now, Casella's going to work to get as much waste, whatever they're permitted to do, in there. And if we start reducing our waste, which is a minority of what they take in, it's not going to affect them. Do we have an interest in doing it? I think we do. I think that everybody, if we keep our eye on that, we've got to get to a place of reduced or zero waste when that landfill closes, or we're going to have to pay to send waste somewhere else. We do have an incentive, but again, it's a political question.
The next question actually is for Tompkins County, Barb and Kat. Does the 60% diversion rate, well actually it's for Onondaga, but I'll let you guys answer. Onondaga and Tompkins. Does the 60% diversion rate for Onondaga and Tompkins County include the trash you send to other counties? I can answer for Onondaga if you want to answer for Tompkins. So in Onondaga County we have flow control, so all of the waste that is generated in the county stays within the county except for some industrial and commercial waste. that is essentially a product that can be sold as a commodity outside of the county. We do burn most of our waste that's not recycled or composted or C&D, and that ash currently goes to High Acres landfill in Penfield. And starting in 2015, actually, that ash will go to the Cortland County landfill through an intermunicipal agreement that the county has set up. Those two counties have set up. We will take their 25,000 tons of trash annually and burn it, and then they'll take our ash. We do count the volume of that ash in our diversion, not as a diversion, but as waste.
Right. Basically, what we need to do every year as part of our planning unit is a report to the DEC that takes into account all that we recycle and compost, what we consider recycling, and all that goes to other landfills. So the answer to the question is yes, that is all included in our percent diversion.
And another question for Tompkins County: How are Ithaca College and Cornell doing in terms of recycling and waste management?
Do you want me to take? Again, both Cornell and Ithaca College have very aggressive recycling programs. They're doing, I don't know what their statistics are right now, maybe Cat does, but they have all the ingredients in place, and we do see their recyclables that come to our recycling center. And as I mentioned earlier, they're considered commercial recycling, high fiber, and they do receive a revenue from us for bringing the material to our facility. Cornell has an active composting operation. Ithaca College has an active composting as well. Food scraps recycling rather, and that goes to cubic compost. And the Cornell is on site. And soon it will be going to an anaerobic digestion facility at the wastewater treatment plant.
The next question deals with leachate. Leachate, and I'm going to use this term because the question asker did, leachate or garbage juice is a big concern. Since neither landfill is in the Seneca or Cayuga Lake watershed, what harm do they do to the lake water quality? Who would like to jump on that one?
Well, first of all, they are in the Finger Lakes watershed.
No, they're not.
They are not.
They're in a watershed. They're in the Great Lakes watershed, okay?
Wide River watershed.
As far as leachate goes, for years, Seneca Meadows would trickle it into the Seneca Falls waste sewer treatment plant. And to the tune where it would kill, or it would degrade the anaerobic activity, and then they would have to stop. The problem with putting leachate in, I think, in any municipal water plant is that those water plants don't test for the constituents that are made up or in the leachate. So it's just not a good practice. I don't think that that's currently happening anymore. They have put in place a purification facility at the landfill, and I think we're in a better place. But ultimately, what's going to happen with the leachate in the years to come is really the big question.
Some of the leachate from, I would just say, some of the leachate from the Ontario County landfill gets trucked to the Geneva wastewater treatment plant, which discharges into Seneca Lake. And then the rest of it, I believe, goes to Canandaigua's water treatment plant, which discharges into the Canandaigua outlet. And that goes eventually to Lake Ontario.
There are many components. There are many components of solid waste nowadays that are just as hazardous as hazardous waste, which goes to a hazardous waste landfill. There's only one hazardous waste landfill in the state of New York in Niagara County. And the leachate from those landfills carries those compounds to the wastewater treatment plant, and many of those compounds will pass right through the plant. For example, PCBs can be found in landfills. Those are persistent organic toxins. They have extremely long lives, and they bioaccumulate as they go up the food chain. So they may be going into the wastewater treatment plant and passing through the wastewater treatment plant in concentrations that are far below a regulatory limit. But you're talking about thousands of gallons of this material, leachate, per week going through the wastewater treatment plant and going into the lake. So over time, there's a large volume of that material, and there's a long list of such chemicals that can be found in leachate.
Thanks, Gary. I'd like to move on to another question. Excuse me. Is there a possibility that there will be an extension of the property protection plan to account for the reach of the stench from the landfills? Will it also extend to those whose properties stand to be affected by the plans to ship trash by rail? Anyone like to offer a?
I don't think there's any plans for trash to be railed to Ontario County. And I don't think there's any support from Casella. They've basically said that they weren't going to accept trash if it was going to be railed in. They pretty much have made a statement in several of the committee meetings. I'm not sure, and I certainly support our neighbors to the east in fighting that fight in terms of have it railed in. I think it's a bad idea, and I think from a regional point of view, even though it's to the east of us, I look at it as a regional approach, and it certainly affects what we want to do here in terms of tourism and agriculture. It's not conducive for economic growth and just a whole lot of levels. As far as the property protection plan, when the county managed the landfill, we had I think a very generous and extensive property protection plan in terms of buying homes that were affected at assessment value. I think there's been cases where when the county owned it and people wanted to move out, if they couldn't get their dollar, the county bought it. I think since we transitioned to Casella, I think the same property protection plan is in place. Does it extend in terms of people that are smelling it occasionally in the town of Geneva or even the city of Geneva? There was a time, I think, in probably the last year that it was very frequent. I'm optimistic that Casella has made every attempt to minimize that. God gave me a very large nose, and I don't smell it, and if I did, I definitely would tell them. I'm attuned to it. My phone would ring if I get those calls, but as far as I don't think there's anything in the offerings for Casella to offer a smell protection plan.
Sure.
I'd just like to say something about odor from the landfill. Landfill gas came under regulation under the Clean Air Act about 15 years ago. And landfills generate hundreds of thousands of tons of landfill gas each year. About 50% of the gas is carbon dioxide. About 50% of the gas is methane. Both are odorless. Up to 1% is the regulated part of the gas, the non-methane organic compounds. Those are so toxic that Congress decided to regulate that under the Clean Air Act and require landfills to capture as much of the gas as possible. State-of-the-art technology captures about 75% of the gas and burn it at temperatures so high that it chemically destroys those toxins. So 25% of the gas escapes unregulated, uncontrolled. And that's the odorous part. So if you smell landfill gas, you're breathing toxics.
Thank you for leaving us on a happy note, Gary. I want to ask a question here for Epiphagy. What high-value products are you making for feeding people and to animals, and how are you doing it? Also, how are you finding markets for these products?
Good questions. So the how we do it part, I'm not going to go into too many specifics there, but I do want to say that it's an all-natural biological process. It doesn't use any genetically modified organisms or hazardous chemicals or whatnot. This is the process that gives us compost, animal feed, and biofuels back from food waste and organic waste materials. Is a very benign and naturally occurring process. How that's optimized and commercialized is a longer answer, but that's the short of it. What products are we making? We are producing high protein, high energy feed supplements that are targeted primarily for the dairy industry. In order to get optimum performance out of dairy cows, it's necessary to give them a bit more than just grass. Dairy science has evolved a lot over the past 30, 50 years. We're now getting much more productivity out of dairy cows than we were ever able to previously. Dairy is a very large part of upstate New York's agricultural base, and anything that we can do to produce high value, high energy, high protein supplements goes a long way there. So as far as the marketability and the market acceptance, it's been very positive. We have successfully demonstrated that we can take the post-consumer plate scrapings that people threw away last week and use them today to produce high-quality, very nutritious feed supplements that are not only safe and healthful and nutritious for dairy cows, they also exceed all of the health and nutritional and labeling requirements for human food consumption as well. So yes, we have made food from garbage.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to move on to some of the questions. We categorized the questions as well into some of the options looking forward. And there's a few questions here that are asking a similar question just in different ways, so I'm going to try to rephrase it. Essentially, if Seneca County, if Ontario County, if the whole Finger Lakes region approaches zero waste in our communities, doesn't that actually incentivize Seneca Meadows, and maybe even Casella as an operator, though the community owns the landfill, just to import more waste? The problem doesn't essentially go away the harder we try. The stick isn't really being waved over the communities where the trash is coming from. Any brave takers?
I think that's true, but there are incentives. I mean, let's face it too, it's not just a local problem. This is a state problem, this is a national problem. And the state is trying to get counties to pass these solid waste management plans. We're all supposed to be doing this, we're all supposed to be reducing waste. I think the state should go in there and say there's a $10 state fee for every tip and for tipping at a landfill. I mean, there's a lot of things the state could do to help out, but our agreements end when they end, so they can make as much money as they can make till then. We've got to stop it at the end. We've got to come to an end. They'll still try to make money while they can, but we've got to get a plan and stay with the plan. So, I mean, that's my feeling about it. I think, though, but we need, the people of the earth need to come together on this.
You know, I would agree. I mean, just because we have landfills doesn't mean we should exempt ourselves from trying to reduce our own waste. And we can only hope that people follow the lead. Certainly we have a big incentive when you're sitting right there next to a landfill. It should incent us to do it. But, we were in a much better place. And like I said, in 1960, as individuals, we produced half of what we're producing today. And if you went back probably 40 years before that, it was probably less. At one point in time, there weren't any landfills. People burned stuff in their backyard and had little composting. They didn't know they were composting, but they were just getting rid of their trash in their own yards. There weren't landfills. So it's something of the 20th and the 21st century. We invented them, and we can certainly get rid of them. It's not impossible.
Anybody else like to take a stab? All right, maybe this question might be good for Kat or Barb. Anyone, of course, can answer. But one question is, can someone on the panel share examples of the type of markets for recycled materials, or the type of materials that are made from recyclables? One more time. There you go.
Okay. One of the things that drives our program is the fact that we're not trying to market materials just as a local county. We're working with a company, whether it was the first company or the second or the third, that has other material recycling facilities nationally, that has agreements with end users. We have markets, all in Canada, as well as in different parts of the United States. Unfortunately, some of the material is still going to China as well, but we have the reliance of the fact that there's 1 million tons of materials that are being marketed by the company. And so it doesn't really ever turn into a situation that the economics don't work for us. Even in the poorest markets, the cost of recycling is still cheaper than the cost of disposal. As far as very specific information, we do have a list of the places that it goes to. Kat, did you want to talk about that? Or?
Just to clarify, was the question specifically looking at the types of materials, like the types of products that are made?
That was part of the question.
content?
What happens to the materials once they're processed?
Yeah, like if you recycle a soda bottle, what might you see come out of the other end of that recycling process?
Sure. And it's good to remember, too, that just about anything is recyclable. You just have to have a system in which to collect it efficiently. You have to have a market for it. Somebody has to have demand for it. And you have to have an easy way to process it. So that's the great thing about technology, is as we're growing more and more items are becoming recyclable. Examples of things: paper goes back into paper, cardboard, newspaper, but also looking at things like the plastic decking, the lumber, right? That's made from often plastic bags. Soda bottles and things like that, rigid plastics, go back into the plastic lumber. And so there are more and more office supplies. You'll see like pens made from recycled content. So it's expanded beyond just your simple, straightforward, this is getting made back into paper, to all sorts of products that are out
There's
there.
clothing also that consists of recycled plastic bottles and things like that as well.
Yeah, there's actually a significant market for textiles. In fact, so let's leave it at that. I want to leave.
If I might, let me just jump right in with one quick thought
Sure.
there that I don't want to have missed, and that's that we talk about recycling beverage containers, food products, packaging, etc. But this bottle, when it gets recycled, is not going to be turned back into a plastic beverage bottle. It will most likely become a car bumper. And the reason is because the food and beverage industry doesn't trust the waste and recycling industry. So they won't produce packaging out of recycled and recovered materials. And that, more than anything else, is one of the biggest problems that we need to fix in recycling, is this idea that it's only good enough for food if we make it out of oil, and it's not good enough for food if we've made it from recycled plastics.
So in our remaining few minutes, I'd like to leave the panel, and if everyone has an answer, I'll just go down the line. So as a closing question suggested to me, how can citizens influence and leverage their legislatures to utilize their power to ban landfill expansions. And a related question, can agreements with companies like Casella be reverted? Can the county then take over not just the ownership that they already have, but also the operations of that landfill, and therefore kind of decide whose trash comes when and how often? So before anyone answers, I'll give you a minute to think. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I'm going to answer a couple of questions here that I think I can fill a little space with. One was about incineration and the amount of volume or weight reduction. And I'm just a board member. I'm not an engineer, but I think the reduction of weight is a third. So when we incinerate our trash in Onondaga County, the weight is reduced by a third, and the volume is reduced down to 10% of the volume that it was. And the other question I think I lost here. So I think, how is recycling rate measured and calculated? It's really confusing, and it depends on the community. And actually, it can be really hard for communities to, say Walmart, as an example, or a grocery store, gets all of their materials in big cardboard boxes. Well, they recycle that cardboard, but may never go to Tompkins Solid Waste or the MRF in Onondaga County, because they have a direct connection to a recycler themselves. So unless we call that grocery store or Walmart or Target or Kohl's or the pet store or the garage down the street that gets his stuff in cardboard boxes, we can't count that recycling. Or if we do call him and he never returns our call, or he doesn't know how to weigh or value or volume that, we can't count it. Some communities have the capacity, the time, the people, the resources to do that more than others. So I'm not saying that our recycling rates are suspect, but there's a lot of work that goes into that calculation, and some communities have more capacity to do that than others. And I think I've sparked some interest from Barb.
I can say that our recycling rate of our rate of 58% is on the low side, because we don't, even though we do try to get that information, we don't hear back from some of the companies that backhaul their material to other facilities. So that would be a low number.
Thanks.
And just one other thing, Chris mentioned that it's really confusing to compare county to county. The state is looking at moving more towards pounds per person generated per day to really even it out across the board too.
Thanks. All right, so back to my closing question. If I had the Jeopardy dong, I would have played it instead of filling the time with my own answers. So this closing question, what can we really do? Folks have come here tonight, they're interested, they can call you, email you, express concern, but how can they really leverage their elected officials, governing bodies, to move in a way that the community might see fit with landfills? Mark, do you mind? And we'll follow down the line from you.
Well, just the way that you do it all the time. You call your legislators up. You vote for the people that say that they're concerned about the environment. You send them letters. You go to the meetings and stand up there and say what you want to say. And it works. I've been at county board meetings before I was on the county board, where the room was filled up with people, and I think people get the message after a while. So you have to use your citizen pressure, not just at the one time you vote every few years, but if you don't like what your legislator's doing, find somebody that's better and get behind them at the next election. And make sure that issue is talked about so people know what's going on, why this is happening. As far as taking over the operation for Ontario County, very difficult. It would be very difficult to do. I don't think it's a realistic aspiration. The agreement was signed. It was for 25 years. It's a pretty good for the operator agreement. It says that we have to support them in their permits, requests, cooperate with them. From their point of view, they made a big investment. They wouldn't have done it on a 2-year lease, so I think we're stuck with them. If the only way out would be if they were to breach the agreement. It seems to me there's an argument that this odor is kind of a breach of agreement, but they're trying to address it. So I think I looked at this and would love to say let's get rid of Casella, but it would be very complicated. It would be very difficult, and I think it's at this point. Personally, my eye is on 2028. I think that's realistic, and that's not even for sure if we don't push for that.
Thanks.
Well, I couldn't answer it much differently than Mark answered it, but he's 100% right. I mean, if you want, it really is up to legislators, and you need to know where they stand, and you need to ask those questions very succinctly. You know, are you for the protection of the environment, or you don't care? It's really black and white. And make sure that those folks get put in office. I think we've seen a really good transition in the town of Waterloo this last election cycle. We had a town that was really kind of leaning towards sanctioning the clay mine or permitting the clay mine, which is part of the expansion of Seneca Meadows, and the new town board is not in favor of that. They've changed. And why is that? It's because the people made the change. That's what they want. And it goes right down the line. I mean, we're talking about landfills today, but I try to work hard to protect the region. It's the Finger Lakes that we need to think about. We have a very unique resource here that we should all be very proud of and very thankful that we have. I mean, water is going to be the gold of the future, and we sit on a tremendous amount of fresh water. And if we aren't careful, we can ruin it. I'm fighting with the people down in Watkins Glen to keep the LP gas storage out. I'm fighting on the north end. If people don't want me to do it, they vote me out. Then I got to make a decision. Do I want to stay here and live with those clowns or get out of town? But right now, I'm staying and fighting.
Barb, any perspective on our closing question?
I don't think so.
Thanks. Gary? I think you just turned it off.
I agree with Steve. Mark's right.
All right, Charlie. Do you agree with Steve? Do you agree with Gary? Do you agree with Steve?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the past speakers for sure. And at the risk of pandering to this crowd, the vote for the expansion at the Ontario County landfill, it took place. And it happened. And there were a lot of people that didn't want it, and they came out. But as far as the contract that we have right now, Gary's the lawyer, but this was done many, many years ago. It's poorly written as far as the OML is concerned, to the point where it's based on financial incentives. There was nothing about performance. And no one thought about it at the time, years and years ago, about the performance. So how do we get the current vendor to do the right thing based on the permit and based on the fact that he's got to run a business and based on the fact that we also have environmental concerns? And again, at the risk of pandering, the board didn't do it. The Ontario County board didn't do the things that have been in place. It was people here, it was people that showed up at the meetings, and that made, I feel, the current vendor a lot more compliant and a lot more vigilant in doing the right thing. So I guess I'm leaving it at a high note. Again, I think it's really up to the people and not necessarily the elected officials.
Thanks. Graham, anything to add?
I agree. I don't think that you can predict the vast number of things that can go wrong over a 30-year deal. Anyone who's married.
Thank you, Graham.
But that aside, it's clearly a community issue. Over the next 14 years, however many that the Ontario County landfill will continue to operate before it's closed or it needs to be expanded again. I think that the towns and residents of Ontario County and of Seneca County and our other Finger Lakes communities need to decide what kind of community they live in. Do they live in a community where landfills and host benefit agreements are welcomed because of the trading off of financial benefits versus environmental and social consequences? Or do you live in a community that does not welcome a landfill and the town board has passed a resolution that says as much? It really, I think, boils down to that fundamental issue. And I live in East Bloomfield, so I would like to see East Bloomfield pass a resolution that there'll be no landfill. And it's just that simple.
Yes, please.
We would like to see that too, because the sense we have, and I'll tell you, Geneva, town of Seneca, downwind, downstream from the landfill, we get the sense that the West doesn't give a darn, and that we're in this, and the voting is usually this little group from the East, anti-landfill, then the West is fine because they're getting the money and they're not downwind. And we need the people in the West part of the county to get on the right page, because we're all going to pay for it.
People in East Bloomfield that do want a landfill, I want to know who they are so I can work a little harder trying to convince them it's not a good idea.
Kat, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just continue to encourage that while you're looking at end-of-life disposal efforts, also looking at diversion programs and extended producer responsibility composting. Look for ways to avoid it in the first place so that you don't have that as you pair it with these concerns.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to thank our panel, Mark Venuti, Steve Churchill, Barb Ekstrom, Gary Abraham, Charlie Evangelista, Graham Fenney, and Kat McCarthy. It's kind of hard to go the whole way down the line, but give them a round of applause. Most importantly, I'd like to thank the audience for attending tonight. This was certainly a long but very important program. And I'd like to thank Hobart and William Smith, Ken Camera, and my colleagues at the Environmental Finance Center, as well as the Finger Lakes Institute for making this program happen. Thank you. Have a good night.